Imagine living in a world where your dentist might shoot you, your mayor could legally arrest a train, and the local emperor was just some guy who declared himself king because why not? And just when you think the cowboy myths couldn't possibly get dumber, history politely informs you that, oh no, partner, we've barely untied the first knot in this tumbleweed of stupidity. 1. One outlaw was so tired of life on the run that he literally mailed himself to the sheriff. Yes, his escape plan was not escaping. He climbed into a crate scribbled, "Here is a criminal, open with care," and shipped himself like a human Amazon package. Imagine the sheriff opening that box expecting, I don't know, a piano, only to find a dusty man popping out like a jack-in-the-box of bad decisions. That's not outlaw behavior, that's peak millennial job resignation energy. He wasn't arrested, he unsubscribed. Forget epic manhunts or shootouts. This guy basically said, "I quit," and paid for his own delivery fee. UPS should sponsor this story. 2. Before YouTube influencers were selling detox teas, there was Soapy Smith, a con artist whose big business was soap. He'd wrap a $100 bill around one bar, shuffle it into a suitcase full of regular bars, and auction them off to gullible crowds. Surprise! Only his buddies in the audience ever won. Everyone else just went home with overpriced hygiene. It was basically the 19th century version of a loot box scam. Congratulations, you didn't win money, but your hands smell slightly less like horse. This wasn't just a grift, it was the prototype for every rigged carnival game, every limited edition NFT, and every time you bought gas station sushi thinking it was a bargain. 3. Gunslinger Clay Allison was upset with his dentist. Fair enough, we've all had a bad dental experience. But Allison's version of leaving a one-star Yelp review was to storm into the office, tie the dentist to a chair, and yank out one of the dentist's own teeth. A customer satisfaction survey, Old West edition. This wasn't justice. It was the dental equivalent of, "See how you like it, nerd." Forget word-of-mouth advertising. Allison believed in word-of-force dentistry. Honestly, if dentists today had to risk this kind of feedback, fluoride would be free, and they'd throw in a free Xbox just to keep patients happy. 4. In New Mexico, the local sheriff once arrested a steam locomotive. That's not a joke. The railroad company hadn't paid its taxes, so the sheriff walked up to a literal train, chained it to the tracks, and declared it under arrest. Imagine being a passenger halfway through your trip when the lawman strolls up and slaps metaphorical cuffs on your ride. Sorry folks, train's in jail. You'll have to walk. It's less a legal action and more a Looney Tunes sketch. Forget Cowboys versus Indians. The real Old West showdown was small-town sheriffs versus heavy machinery. And spoiler, the train didn't resist. 5. Two Texans once agreed to duel in a pitch-black room. Yes, they turned gunfighting into a live-action version of Marco Polo, except with bullets. Predictably, it went badly. One man managed to set his own hair on fire, which gave his opponent the perfect glowing target. This wasn't bravery. This was Darwinism with gunpowder. Imagine explaining that death certificate. Cause of death: playing peekaboo with bullets? The Old West wasn't the birthplace of honor. It was the birthplace of the world's dumbest Call of Duty lobby. 6. Emperor Norton of San Francisco crowned himself Emperor of the United States. No election, no war, no coup, just a guy saying, "I'm in charge now." And the wild part? People went along with it. He issued his own currency, wore a ridiculous uniform, and did ceremonial inspections of the city with his dog. Shops accepted his fake money like he was the original Chuck E. Cheese. This wasn't leadership. It was cosplay that got way out of hand. San Francisco essentially said, sure, why not, free entertainment. Honestly, Norton was less an emperor and more an early influencer. Zero qualifications, but incredible branding. 7. In 1900s San Diego, desperate for rain, city leaders hired Charles Hatfield, a self-proclaimed rainmaker. His chemical concoctions worked so well that it rained non-stop, flooding the city, destroying bridges, and causing millions in damage. When Hatfield showed up to collect his $10,000 fee, the council basically told him to get lost, arguing that it was an act of God. So, the city got scammed twice. First by paying a weather wizard, then by not paying him when he actually delivered the apocalypse. Imagine hiring a guy to fix your leaky faucet, and instead, he drowns your entire house. That was San Diego. 8. Cowboys had a bizarre funeral tradition. burying men standing upright, fully dressed in boots and gun belts, as if death was just a long coffee break. The logic was that a cowboy should be ready for one last ride, even underground. Great. So archaeologists centuries later get to dig up skeletons standing like extras from a zombie western. Imagine being a cowboy widow explaining to your kids, "Daddy didn't die, he just really committed to planking." Honestly, this wasn't a burial, it was a posthumous cosplay competition. 9. The legendary gunfight at the OK Corral? The cinematic, drawn-out battle Hollywood milks in slow motion? Yeah, it lasted about 30 seconds. That's it. You've probably sneezed longer than the entire legendary shootout. No sweeping orchestral music, no heroic standoff, just a brief, chaotic burst of panic followed by awkward silence. It wasn't the Wild West's greatest duel, it was basically a bar fight with better costumes. The only thing truly epic about it was how badly history exaggerated the whole thing. 10. Billy the Kid, the outlaw icon, was only 21 when he died, and despite his nickname, he wasn't exactly racking up victories. Most of his legend comes from him being good at running away. He killed maybe 8 people. Tops. That's not outlaw genius. That's just the average weekend traffic accident. He wasn't America's Robin Hood. He was more like America's drunk roommate who wouldn't leave. Honestly, the biggest crime here was branding. Billy the Kid sounds cool. William the Slightly Unreliable doesn't sell dime novels. 11. Cowboys weren't just bad at fighting. They were also terrible at naming towns. That's why we ended up with places like Looneyville, Texas, and Booger Hole, West Virginia. Imagine riding 500 miles west to find your fortune and ending up in Scratch Ankle, Alabama. That's not destiny, that's indigestion. These names weren't poetic. They were what happened when drunk settlers ran out of imagination halfway through a card game. You can almost hear it. What's this place called? Scratch's Ankle, Scratch Ankle. Done. 12. Gold prospectors were so bad at spelling that when they tried to name a town after the ptarmigan bird, they gave up and called it Chicken, Alaska. They literally saw the silent P and just said, nope. Imagine being immortalized in history as the people who invented an entire town name out of spelling laziness. These were men who thought dynamite was a cooking tool, so maybe it tracks. Honestly, it's still better than living in Ziggs, California, which sounds like a Wi-Fi password. 13. Cowboys loved dueling so much that some idiots decided to make it interesting by using dynamite instead of pistols. Yes, instead of shooting at each other, they lit explosives and played chicken. Spoiler, everyone lost. This wasn't bravery, it was a caveman version of Jackass. Forget the noble duelist standing tall at dawn. This was just 2 guys auditioning for a Darwin Award with TNT. Imagine Tinder bios back then. Looking for someone who loves long walks, whiskey, and recreational explosions. 14. Drunkenness wasn't just a pastime, it was an industry. Saloon owners literally built trapdoors under the bar so they could dump passed-out cowboys into the basement and make room for paying customers. That's not hospitality, it's waste management. Imagine getting blackout drunk, waking up in a cellar and thinking, wow, the service here is really underground. Today, bars just call you an Uber. Back then, they called gravity. 15. Cowboys didn't always ride horses. Sometimes they rode ostriches. Yeah, when horse shortages hit, some bright sparks thought ostrich racing was the solution. Turns out, ostriches are mean, fast, and about as cooperative as a caffeinated toddler. Riders would get clawed, kicked, and humiliated in front of cheering crowds. This wasn't sport. It was chaos wrapped in feathers. Imagine a Kentucky Derby where the horses all hated you personally. That's ostrich racing. 16. Some gamblers in the Old West were so paranoid about being cheated that they'd literally shoot the dealer mid-game. Not because they were robbed, but because they lost and assumed cheating. It wasn't poker. It was Russian roulette with cards. Imagine Vegas operating under the same rules. Half the strip would be empty. Honestly, the only house rule in the West was, if you lose, you can always just shoot the furniture. 17. Cowboys believed hair tonic could cure baldness, impotence, hangovers, you name it. Some of it was made with lead, mercury, or literal rattlesnake heads. Drinking it was basically volunteering to speedrun death. These weren't cures. They were medieval chemical weapons in a fancy bottle. Imagine someone selling you essential oils that actually contain uranium. That's Old West medicine. And yet, people bought it by the bottle. Proof that humanity's been falling for wellness scams since forever. 18. Cowboys were so dedicated to proving their toughness that some of them took up dueling with rattlesnakes. Yes, instead of shooting a rival, they'd grab a venomous snake by the tail and try to slap each other with it like it was a whip. Spoiler, the snake always won. Imagine being so drunk that your best idea for conflict resolution is to play whack-a-mole with a reptile that literally comes preloaded with poison. This wasn't justice. It was nature's way of balancing the books. And somewhere out there, two skeletons are probably still lying side by side, one with a revolver, the other with a snake-shaped regret. 19. Some innovative cowboys decided to cure hangovers by drinking gunpowder mixed with whiskey. That's right, breakfast of champions, dynamite juice. The logic was probably something like, if it doesn't kill me, it'll make me stronger. Except no, it didn't. It just made them sick, violent, and occasionally flammable. Imagine waking up from a night of bad whiskey and thinking, you know what'll help? Explosives. That's not a hangover cure. That's the recipe for becoming a human fireworks show at your own funeral. 20. One Nevada saloon once advertised free drinks for anyone who could ride a bucking mule. Harmless enough, except the mule was secretly trained to throw riders directly into a water trough outside the bar. So hundreds of drunk cowboys lined up to get concussed for a free shot of whiskey. It was less a drinking contest and more of a Darwin Award distribution center. The mule, by the way, probably retired with better job satisfaction than most modern bartenders. 21. Cowboy hygiene was so bad that when one doctor tried to introduce soap to minors, they accused him of being a con man. Bathing was suspicious. Washing your hands was practically witchcraft. Some men literally believed dirt kept disease away, as if filth was an invisible shield. Imagine rejecting a bar of soap like it's a pyramid scheme. These were men who would happily drink. Rotgut whiskey filtered through a rusty tin cup but thought clean water was too dangerous. If bacteria could laugh, this would have been their sitcom. 22. Cowboys loved gambling so much that in some saloons, poker chips weren't even necessary. Players bet body parts. Fingers, teeth, even ears were put on the table. And yes, when people lost, they actually followed through. It wasn't poker, it was amateur surgery with whiskey as anesthesia. Imagine raising a hand of cards and someone actually raising a hand. That's not a poker game. That's Saw Frontier Edition. 23. Wild West dentistry was so advanced that the main method for curing a toothache was yanking the entire tooth out with pliers at the bar. No training, no sterilization, just a guy with steady hands and a shot of whiskey. Some barbers doubled as surgeons because apparently if you can trim a beard, you can also amputate a leg. And yet people lined up for it. Today we have Yelp reviews. Back then, if your barber's floor wasn't covered in blood, he probably wasn't considered experienced enough. 24. Some towns were so desperate for law enforcement that they'd hire sheriffs straight out of prison. The idea was, well, he's done crime, so now he knows how to stop crime. That's not law and order. That's hiring a wolf to guard the sheep because he once ate one. Imagine living in a town where the guy who just robbed your store last month now wears a badge and gets to confiscate your gun. Honestly, it makes modern politics look almost sane. 25. Cowboys drank so much whiskey that bartenders literally watered it down with kerosene, turpentine, or rattlesnake heads just to stretch the supply. And people still drank it. Forget aged bourbon. This was chemical warfare in a glass. You weren't sipping whiskey. You were slowly embalming yourself. Honestly, if you survived Old West alcohol, congratulations. Your body was basically a haunted distillery. 26. Gunfights weren't as glamorous as Hollywood shows. Most were just two drunk men firing wildly until one accidentally hit something, usually a bystander. Accuracy wasn't a skill, it was a rumor. Towns sometimes banned shooting contests because too many people died watching them. Imagine going to a county fair where the pie-eating contest ends with 3 fatalities. That's the Old West. The only real winner was the Undertaker, who probably had the busiest business on Main Street. 27. Cowboys didn't just fight with guns. They also weaponized food. Pies, steaks, and even live chickens were thrown in drunken bar brawls. Yes, a saloon brawl sometimes looked like a Looney Tunes episode with a body count. Picture a furious outlaw storming into a bar, and instead of drawing his revolver, he hurls a half-frozen ham at someone's skull. That's not justice, that's culinary homicide. 28. In some frontier towns, you could literally pay your bar tab with animal pelts, bullets, or chunks of gold dust. That meant bartenders had to double as accountants, jewelers, and occasionally armed guards. Imagine trying to close out a shift when your cash register contains 3 beaver skins, half a gold nugget, and 6 live bullets. It wasn't bartending. It was running a pawn shop with alcohol poisoning. 29. Cowboys had a charming habit of shooting the piano player if they didn't like the song, literally. Imagine being the poor guy playing "Oh, Susanna" and suddenly realizing your audience is drunk, armed, and not vibing with your playlist. Today we complain when the DJ won't take requests. In the Old West, failing to play Freebird could cost you your actual life. 30. One outlaw was caught because he robbed a bank, then stayed in town bragging about it. He literally sat in the saloon buying rounds with the stolen money until the sheriff walked in and arrested him on the spot. That's not outlaw genius. That's Grand Theft Auto played by someone who thinks the wanted stars will just go away if you ignore them. 31. Cowboys believed shooting at the moon could change the weather. So, when droughts hit, entire groups of grown men would get drunk, aim at the sky, and unload their revolvers at outer space. That's not meteorology, that's space harassment. The only thing they accomplished was proving to future archaeologists that gunpowder was wasted on idiots. 32. Stagecoach robbers often wore flour sacks over their heads as masks, which meant sometimes they couldn't see. There are stories of outlaws tripping over rocks, running into trees, or even robbing the wrong coach entirely. Imagine being a passenger and watching your robber faceplant before he even gets to demand your wallet. Forget dangerous desperados, this was Scooby-Doo villains with worse coordination. 33. Cowboys once tried to settle bar fights by playing Russian roulette with fully loaded guns. Yes, instead of 1 bullet, they filled all 6 chambers and pulled the trigger anyway. Spoiler, everyone lost. That wasn't a game. That was suicide cosplay. Honestly, it's the kind of behavior that makes you wonder how the species survived long enough to invent Wi-Fi. 34. Some frontier doctors believed whiskey could cure snake bites, which sounds fine until you realize their cure involved drinking the entire bottle. If the venom didn't kill you, the alcohol poisoning would. It wasn't medicine, it was euthanasia with extra steps. Imagine staggering into a clinic after being bitten, and the doctor just hands you a bottle like, "Here, die slower." Honestly, it's a miracle anyone lived past 30. 35. Cowboys once believed that carrying around a dried-out rabbit's foot would bring them luck, which is hilarious considering the rabbit clearly wasn't that lucky. Men would strap rotting paws to their belts like they were fashion accessories from the world's worst taxidermy shop. Imagine walking into a saloon smelling like decomposing rodent, and bragging about it like it's Gucci. This wasn't superstition. It was cosplay for men who thought personal hygiene was witchcraft. And if anyone ever questioned the logic, you could just point to the rabbit's foot and say, "Hey, at least I'm still alive." Which is technically true, but also technically insane. 36. Cowboys occasionally use dynamite to fish. Because, why bother with a net when you can just blow up the lake? They'd toss in a stick of dynamite, watch it explode, and then collect whatever floated up. That wasn't fishing. That was aquatic genocide. Imagine explaining that hobby to a park ranger today. "Oh, I'm just base hunting with high explosives." Honestly, the only thing they ever caught was the attention of everyone within a 5-mile blast radius. Somewhere in history, a fish probably looked at a cowboy and thought, "You know what? We deserve to evolve legs." 37. Cowboys didn't exactly understand nutrition, so their diet was mostly whiskey, beans, and whatever animal they could shoot before blacking out. Scurvy was rampant because vegetables were considered Eastern nonsense. Imagine dying because you refused to eat an orange. These were men who'd risk gunfire, rattlesnakes, and smallpox, but put a carrot in front of them and suddenly they're fragile Victorian children. Today we laugh at people who think kale smoothies cure cancer. Back then, men genuinely thought potatoes were sorcery. If Whole Foods existed in 1880, it would have been burned to the ground out of sheer fear. 38. Cowboys used to stage justice by literally tying criminals to wagons and dragging them out of town. That's not due process, that's medieval DoorDash. and half the time the criminal was just someone who cheated at cards or insulted the wrong guy's mustache. Imagine getting exiled from your town not because you committed murder, but because you didn't like someone's chili recipe. Honestly, frontier justice wasn't about morality. It was about giving drunk men an excuse to use rope. 39. Cowboys thought nothing of using their revolvers as alarm clocks, shooting into the air every morning to start the day. This wasn't tradition. It was a noise complaint with gunpowder. Imagine living next to a man whose idea of a rooster is ballistic trauma. Every morning, gunshots rang out, and everyone just went, "Oh, that's just Bill waking up." These weren't gunslingers. They were toddlers with access to live ammunition. And somehow, historians still call this a golden age. 40. Cowboys frequently mistook skunks for small game animals. They'd shoot, skin, and then realize their prize came with a biological nuclear weapon attached. Imagine dragging home your hard-earned dinner only to fumigate the entire house with eau de Pepe Le Pew. Some towns had to outlaw skunk hunting because the smell would linger for weeks. So not only did these men destroy their homes, they destroyed property values. The Old West wasn't a frontier of dreams. It was a scratch-and-sniff apocalypse. 41. Cowboys also loved firing their guns in celebration, especially indoors. Weddings, bar fights, birthdays, bang, bang, bang. Which means the ceiling of every saloon looked like Swiss cheese. Imagine being a bartender trying to keep customers safe from whiskey-fueled rainstorms of lead. You'd think the constant accidental injuries would stop them, but no. To a cowboy, a bullet hole in the ceiling wasn't a hazard. It was interior decoration. Honestly, Pinterest would have had a meltdown in the 1800s. 42. Cowboys had such bad table manners that some saloons banned knives and forks entirely. Too many arguments ended with cutlery being used as weapons, so they just handed men slabs of meat and told them to gnaw on it like feral dogs. Imagine walking into a restaurant and being told, "Sorry, utensils cause too many stabbings. Here's your steak, eat it with your hands." This wasn't fine dining. It was survival training disguised as dinner. Michelin stars? More like bullet holes in the wall. 43. Cowboys often wore wool underwear year-round because apparently sweating yourself into a bacterial swamp was considered rugged. In the summer heat, men literally baked inside their own clothing. Diseases spread so fast that some doctors advised airing out undergarments on public clotheslines, which usually got shot down by offended neighbors. Imagine getting into a duel because your underwear flapped the wrong way in the breeze. That's not hygiene. That's biological warfare in long johns. 44. Cowboys were obsessed with practical jokes, except their definition of joke usually involved near-death experiences. Popular pranks included spiking drinks with gunpowder, swapping out saddles so riders fell mid-gallop, or lighting fireworks under sleeping friends. That's not humor. That's terrorism with a laugh track. Imagine waking up to find your bunkmate has put a rattlesnake in your boots and calling it just a prank, bro. These men didn't need enemies. They had friends. 45. Cowboys treated duels like everyday chores, but sometimes they duel over things like soup. Yes, one recorded gunfight started because a man complained his stew was too watery. Another ended because one guy sneezed and shot the ceiling. These weren't romanticized duels of honor. They were food reviews with live ammo. Gordon Ramsay would have thrived in the Old West, mostly because he'd outlive everyone else by simply yelling louder than the gunfire. 46. Some outlaws thought disguising themselves as women was the perfect getaway strategy. They'd throw on a dress, badly apply lipstick, and think no one would notice the 5 o'clock shadow and revolver tucked in their garter. Spoiler, they got noticed. Imagine Bonnie and Clyde if Clyde's disguise was just ugly aunt. The Wild West wasn't full of masterminds. It was a drag show written by people who'd never seen a woman in real life. 47. Cowboys invented the quick draw duel, but most couldn't actually do it. Guns got stuck, belts slipped, bullets misfired. It was a slapstick routine with body counts. Many duels ended not with epic standoffs, but with both men accidentally shooting themselves in the leg. Imagine TikTok challenges, but instead of embarrassment, the prize was lifelong disability. The fact that this became a cultural legend says less about bravery and more about how desperate history was for content. 48. Cowboys genuinely believed that carrying onions in their pockets would prevent disease. They didn't eat them. They just carried them around like stinky hand grenades. Imagine sitting in a crowded saloon, shoulder to shoulder with men all radiating eau de oignon like a medieval Yankee candle. Did it work? Absolutely not. But hey, at least their corpses smelled like a burger topping. 49. Some frontier towns were so rowdy that they actually banned guns in city limits. Yes, the Wild West had stricter gun laws than modern America. Cowboys were furious, but sheriffs had learned the hard way that mixing alcohol with firearms turned every birthday party into a military exercise. Imagine being told you couldn't bring your gun to town and thinking, but how will I eat soup if I can't shoot the waiter? Honestly, we've come full circle. 50. Cowboys didn't just shoot each other. They sometimes shot themselves to collect insurance. Men would wound themselves deliberately, limp around for sympathy, then cash in. It was the 1800s version of faking a slip-and-fall lawsuit at Walmart. The only difference? Instead of suing the store, you just limped dramatically until someone threw pity money at you. Somewhere, one cowboy probably shot himself in the foot and proudly declared, "I'm a genius." No, sir. You're unemployed with gangrene. 51. And finally, my favorite. One outlaw tried to rob a saloon while so drunk he forgot to wear pants. He stormed in, guns blazing, demanding money, only for the bartender to laugh so hard he tackled him to the ground. Imagine being immortalized in history not as a legendary gunslinger, but as the guy whose bare butt foiled his own robbery. That's the Old West in one story: drunk, dumb, and pants optional. If you ever wondered what really built America, it wasn't grit or glory. It was whiskey and humiliation. Now it's your turn. Which disaster deserves the crown for dumbest cowboy moment? Hit like, subscribe, and brace yourself, because trust me, it only gets dumber from here.